All right, everybody, welcome to another deep dive. Uh, Today, we're going to be taking a look at plant biology.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it should be really interesting. Um, we're going to be looking specifically at how plants transport materials internally, which
Mhm.
is
Different from us.
very different from us. Yeah, they don't have, hearts and blood vessels like we do. So it's a totally different system.
It's pretty remarkable how they do it.
Yeah, it really is. So we've got some source material here, kind of like a detailed biology textbook, I guess we could say.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission is to understand these systems a little bit, or how they evolved, and all the sort of intricate details of how these things work.
It all starts with xylem and phloem.
Okay, so those are like the main players
Yeah,
here.
those are the two specialized tissues.
So those are kind of like the plant's version of a circulatory system.
Exactly.
But before we get too far into those details, I'm kind of curious, how did scientists even discover that these systems existed in the first place?
Well, we can thank Marcello Malpighi for that. He was a 17th century scientist who did a pretty cool experiment.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he took a tree trunk and he removed a ring of dark from it.
Like all the way around?
Yeah, like a belt around the tree.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and he observed some interesting things.
Like what?
Well, he found that above the ring, the bark started to swell. And it oozed this sweet fluid.
Oh, that's interesting.
And eventually the tree died.
Oh, so just taking off that little bit of bark killed the whole tree?
It did, yeah.
Huh. That's crazy. So what did that tell him about what was going on inside the tree?
Well, first of all, the swelling indicated that something was being blocked.
Right.
It turned out to be the fluid carrying nutrients down from the leaves, and the fact that the tree died showed that the roots were being deprived of those vital nutrients even though they had some stored reserves.
So that little experiment was like a huge clue.
Yeah, it was like a light bulb moment.
Yeah, that there were separate pathways
Yes,
for different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that leads us into the xylem and phloem.
Yeah, so xylem is responsible for transporting water and minerals up from the roots to the rest of the plant.
Okay, so that's like the plumbing system?
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Okay.
It's made up of dead, hollow cells stacked on top of each other, forming these long, continuous tubes.
So the water just flows right up through those.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So we've got water taken care of, but what about the sugars that are made in the leaves during photosynthesis?
Right, so that's where phloem comes in.
Okay.
And unlike xylem, which is made of dead cells, phloem is made up of living cells
Oh, wow. Okay.
with porous walls, and these cells form a network of interconnected chambers, allowing for the transport of sugars, hormones, and other organic materials.
So it's kind of like a two-way highway system.
Exactly, it can go up or down.
Wow, that's cool. But, I've always wondered, how does water even make it up to the top of like a giant tree?
Right, it seems to defy gravity.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, there are a few theories about that,
Okay.
but the most widely accepted one is called the Cohesion-Tension Theory, also known as transpiration pull.
Okay, let's hear it.
So picture this, the sun is shining on a plant, right?
Mhm.
And water evaporates from tiny openings on the leaves called stomata,
Okay.
and this creates a slight negative pressure within the leaf.
Okay, so like a little vacuum almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this is where cohesion and adhesion come into play.
Right.
So water molecules, they like to stick to each other. That's cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
They also like to stick to surfaces, and that's adhesion.
Okay.
So they're clinging together
Right.
and clinging to the walls of the xylem.
So they're all linked together, basically.
Exactly. And they form this continuous column of water,
Wow.
all the way from the roots to the leaves.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so as water evaporates from the leaves, it pulls on the water molecule below it.
Okay.
And so on and so forth, creating this chain reaction of pulling force.
So it's like this giant chain of water molecules all being pulled upwards.
That's a great way to put it.
That's incredible. But, that must take a lot of force to lift water that high, especially in a tall tree.
It does, and that's where the strength of those cohesive forces between the water molecules comes in.
Okay.
It can withstand a lot of tension, this water column.
Wow, that's really remarkable. But what about when there are no leaves, like in early spring?
Ah, that's a good question.
How does the water move up then?
Well, that's a bit of a mystery that still puzzles scientists.
Really?
Yeah, we know that water does move, but we're not exactly sure how.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. There's still some things we don't know.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in seemingly simple processes like this, there's still a lot to learn.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've talked about how water gets up to the leaves, but what about minerals? How do they get in there?
Well, that's where things get a little more complex.
All right, well, I'm ready for it.
We'll delve into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. Welcome back, everybody. So last time we were talking about how water gets all the way up to the top of those tall trees.
Right, defying gravity.
Yeah, it's really amazing. But what about those other important ingredients that plants need to survive, like the minerals from the soil?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it brings up the idea of active transport.
Active transport.
Yeah, because unlike water, which just moves passively through osmosis,
Okay.
minerals often have to move against their concentration gradient.
So what does that mean?
Well, it means going from an area where there's not a lot of minerals in the soil to an area inside the plant where there's a lot of
Oh,
minerals.
so it's like pushing them uphill.
Exactly, and that takes energy.
Ah, so the plant actually has to work to do that.
It does, yeah, it's not just a free ride.
Huh. That's fascinating. Um, so does this mineral uptake affect the water situation at all?
It does, yeah, they're definitely connected.
Okay, how so?
Well, as the plant accumulates all these minerals in its root cells, it increases the osmotic pressure inside those cells.
Oh, right. I remember osmosis from like high school biology.
Yeah, so water moves to balance out the concentration of dissolved stuff.
Right. It's like water's always trying to go where the party is.
Yeah. Exactly. So as the concentration of minerals goes up in the root cells, water is drawn in from the soil to try and dilute those minerals and balance things out.
Oh, so it's like a 2-for-1 deal.
Exactly. The plant gets its minerals and water flows in as a bonus.
That's so cool. Um, so we've been talking a lot about xylem and the movement of water and minerals,
Mm.
but what about phloem, that other highway system that we talked about?
Right, the one that carries the sugars and other organic materials.
Yeah. How does that one work?
Well, phloem is a bit more mysterious than xylem.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there are some things about it that are really interesting.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, phloem cells have to be alive for transport to happen.
Oh, so it's not just like a passive pipeline.
Nope, the cells themselves are actually involved in moving the sugars around.
Wow. That's amazing. And doesn't the stuff in phloem move in multiple directions?
It does, yeah, it can go up or down at the same time.
Oh, wow. That's even more complicated than xylem.
It is, yeah, it's like a multi-lane highway with traffic going both ways.
That's a good analogy.
Hmm.
Um, so how much stuff can phloem actually move?
A lot, actually. It can transport really large amounts of material very quickly.
Wow, that's impressive.
Uh-huh.
Um, so is there any theory that explains how all this works?
Well, there's the mass flow theory.
Mass flow theory, okay.
It's the most widely accepted explanation, but it doesn't explain everything.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Okay, so imagine you have two balloons connected by a tube.
All right.
One balloon is inflated more than the other.
Okay.
So there's a pressure difference between them, right?
Yeah.
Now, what happens if you open a valve and let air flow between them?
Well, the air would rush from the one with more pressure to the one with less pressure to try and even things out.
Exactly. Now, replace the air with a sugary solution and the balloons with areas of high and low sugar concentration within the plant.
Okay.
That's basically the mass flow theory.
So the leaves would be like the inflated balloon because that's where the sugars are made.
Right, and that creates pressure that pushes the sugary solution through the phloem to other parts of the plant, like the roots, where there's less sugar.
So it's like a pressure-driven pipeline.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But you said this theory doesn't explain everything.
Right, it doesn't quite match up with everything we observe.
Oh, like what?
Well, the pressure inside phloem cells isn't as high as the theory predicts it should be.
Hmm.
And the distances over which phloem transport is effective is sometimes hard to explain just with pressure differences.
So there's more to the story than just pressure.
Yeah, it seems likely.
Okay, well, what else could be going on?
Well, remember how we talked about phloem cells needing to be alive?
Right, so maybe they're doing more than just sitting there.
Exactly, and that brings us to the idea of cytoplasmic streaming.
Cytoplasmic streaming.
Yeah, so inside each phloem cell, the cytoplasm, that jelly-like stuff, is constantly moving.
Oh, wow, so it's like a little city inside each cell with all this traffic going on.
That's a great way to think about it.
Right, that's crazy. So how does that help move the sugars around?
Well, the cytoplasm has these special proteins that act like tiny motors.
Little tiny motors.
Yeah, and they carry packages of sugars and other materials along these tracks within the cell.
So it's like a conveyor belt system inside each cell.
Exactly, and this cytoplasmic streaming could explain some of those rapid multi-directional movements that we see in phloem.
And it could also explain why oxygen and temperature affect how fast things move.
Right, because those things would affect how well those little motors work.
So it's not just one simple answer, it's a combination of things.
Exactly. It seems like both pressure gradients and active cellular processes are working together to make phloem transport so efficient.
It's getting really complex.
It is, yeah, and it just shows how much we still have to learn about these amazing processes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been an incredible journey so far.
I agree.
We've learned so much about Xylem and Phloem and all the different theories about how they work.
It's really mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. Yeah, I have a whole new level of respect for plants now.
Me too.
But before we wrap things up, I have one more question.
Okay, shoot.
Why should we care about all this?
Yeah.
Why is it important to understand how plants transport materials?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because understanding plant transport isn't just about satisfying our scientific curiosity. It actually has a lot of real-world implications.
Well, I think we can all agree that plants are pretty amazing.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah, we've learned so much about how they move stuff around inside.
It's mind-boggling when you think about all the intricate systems they have.
Yeah, and it's not just passive stuff happening. There's a lot of active work going on in there.
Right, they're working hard to get what they need.
Yeah, but before we wrap things up, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Why should we care about all this? Why is it important for us to understand how plants transport materials?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is that this knowledge has real-world implications.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, it can help us improve agriculture.
Like imagine if we could optimize irrigation techniques by knowing exactly how much water different crops need and when they need it.
That would be huge.
Right, we could save water and resources and grow more food.
Yeah, that would be a game changer. And what about fertilizer?
Yeah, we could develop more targeted fertilizer applications that deliver nutrients right to the roots.
So less waste and less environmental impact.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And I guess this knowledge could also help us develop more nutritious food.
It could, yeah. By understanding how plants transport sugars, we can kind of manipulate their growth patterns.
Oh, so we could direct more resources to the parts that we eat.
Right, like the fruits or the seeds.
So we could potentially increase yields and make the food more nutritious.
Exactly.
That's really cool. So it sounds like this knowledge has implications beyond just agriculture as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like what?
Well, it can help us with conservation efforts, for example.
Okay.
Like by studying how plants respond to stress like drought or pollution, we can figure out how to protect them better. So it's all about understanding how they cope with challenges.
Right, and that can help us develop strategies to help them adapt to a changing climate.
Wow, so we could potentially save entire ecosystems.
Potentially, yeah. And who knows what other applications we might discover in the future.
That's right. Maybe we could even draw inspiration from plant transport systems to develop new technologies,
That's a great idea.
like maybe better water filtration systems or even self-healing materials.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it's really incredible to think about all the possibilities.
It is, and it all starts with understanding the basics.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our little deep dive into plant transport has been a success.
I agree. It's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, we've learned so much about xylem and phloem and all the different theories about how they work.
And we've seen how this knowledge can have a real impact on the world.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep exploring, and never stop being curious about the natural world because there's always something new to discover.
That's right. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next